My name is Matt Dembicki. I'm a cartoonist in the Washington, D.C. area. I often see folks that have professional aspirations, and they think that, I have a great idea, I'm going to do this pitch, and then they'll pitch it to a publisher, and it doesn't get picked up, and they just shut down. They get discouraged and they walk away. Not only from from an aspiring professional level, but also from like an enjoyment level. And that to me is really sad and depressing. There's very few people that achieve that kind of success on their first shot. Less than 1%. Everyone else, you have to kind of work at it. You're kind of in the trenches for a while. It doesn't happen overnight, and this is not just comics, but whether you're publishing books, and I assume same thing with music. I think there's this kind of false sense of, if my stuff is really good, even if it is awesome, the best stuff in the world, it doesn't mean it's going to get picked up that first time. You might have just not met the right person who's going to take you to that level, and even though it is a bummer, and you might get you feel dejected, don't let it sway you. If it's something you love to do, continue to do it. And if you were destined to achieve that next level, it'll happen. Maybe it's not going to happen as fast as you want it to, but I think a lot of people that have the potential to do great things quit on themselves too early.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pilotways Podcast. What is the Pilotways Podcast? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Pilotways Podcast is about artistry, it's about technology, it's about community, and it's about commerce. My name is Alex Vidalis, and you just heard a clip from Matt Dembicki. Matt Dembicki is a Washington, D.C. based artist. He's actually the founder of the DC Conspiracy, which is a comic creators collaborative. He's also the editor of the Eisner-nominated and Aesop prize-winning Trickster, which is a collection of Native American tales, which is rad. And he also did a couple other graphic novels, Mr. Big and Shock, which is about a shark, which is completely rad. He's also one of the masters, one of the brainchilds. Brainchild isn't right. Brainchild means it came from your brain. Getting lost in words here. Why did Matt come on our show? Well, those of you who have listened to this before know why. Artists and musicians coming on our show, telling their personal story, further embeds us, the listener, with their success, and our success is now further embedded with them. This we do believe. Let's get on with the interview with Matt Dembicki on the Pilotways Podcast. How did you come to the idea that there needed to be a collection of DC-based comic book artists?
Right. Actually, I tried doing this like a year or two before with another group, and it was one of my friends in Columbus, Ohio, had a small comics group up there, and so I thought it would be kind of cool to maybe try to replicate something similar in DC, and I tried to get it going, and it just didn't take off. I just wasn't able, and I think it has to do with this being a very kind of transient area. It was really kind of hard to connect with people that way. But about 2 years later, I met my friend Evan Keeling, who's a local cartoonist at the Small Press Expo, and we got to talking, and we were like, well, we should get together and a couple times a year, just talk comics, and we could find like-minded people. Maybe we could even get something going, and that was kind of the impetus for it. Start up with like a small group, probably like 5 or 6 of us that got together about once a month, and then probably 2 or 3 months later, it kind of swelled to over 20, 30 people. So I think it was just the right time to try something like that.
And what was the overall purpose? I know to get together and talk about comics, but was it always about just getting together, or what was the reasoning behind wanting a collective strength? I'm even putting words in your mouth there. Right. Well, why get a group of people together? What was the advantage?
Well, it's just, we're all at that point self-publishing mostly. So sometimes it's just to get together, if not for encouragement, to, kind of talk about, where do you get this printed? How do you get this printed? What tools do you use? And it's a lot simpler. Before the process was, I go to Kinko's and I make a bunch of copies. But now with self-publishing the way it is, print on demand, you have so many different options. And not all, you're trying to find out, use people's knowledge to find out which ones are the best, because the quality obviously varies. You have some good printers and bad printers. We talk about tools that we different use, the kind of utensils and stuff. Another part about actually the comics process is, besides printing, also a distribution. That's always, I think, every creator's biggest challenge is you can make the art, you can present the way you want it, but how do you get it to your audience, right? Or the audience for that product. And so, we talk about what's the best way to do distributions, who's available to do that. And some things work, some things don't, and we've had people who've had experience in that. We try different things, and that's part of the value. A lot of it's also kind of inspirational. Like with anything, sometimes you just get in a rut. It's good to talk to folks or just kind of shoot the breeze a little bit.
I know you said that DC is a transient city. Where did you come from originally?
I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut,
mm-hmm.
and I moved to the DC area in 1992.
And what did you move here for originally?
It was for work. Yeah, I was, when I was in Connecticut, I was working for an afternoon newspaper. We talk about a dying breed. And I came out down here and I was working for an environmental publication.
Right.
So I was writing about, at that time, garbage, solid waste and stuff like that. And then I made a switch to writing about education. So that's what I've been doing since then. I've been an educational reporter.
When did you, because, what did you do originally when you moved down here? Like, what was the actual manner of work that you did? Like, did you do writing? Did you do cartooning? What was...
No, it was writing.
Mm-hmm.
It was all just like I said, my job was to cover the solid waste beat at EPA, write about that. It was a trade publication. Actually, when I came down here, I wasn't doing cartooning at all.
Was that always like part of your life though before that? Were you always an artist?
I grew up, in terms of comics have a special place in my life. My parents were Polish immigrants, and so we lived in Connecticut in a Polish community. I didn't have to learn English because everyone, whether I went to the grocery store or went to the gas station or wherever we went, everyone spoke Polish in that little area.
Sure.
It wasn't until I went to kindergarten that I started to have a problem. I realized everyone else spoke English and I didn't. I was very intimidated to even try. So my mother read that some schools were using comic books to teach kids to read, so she bought me some comics. And that was just, that was the springboard that I needed. So I can read the text and make a visual connection with the art if I didn't understand it or just appreciate the art. And so after that, not only did I just start reading comics, but everything, newspapers, magazines, but I never gave up comics. And I also started having appreciation for art, so I used to draw little mini comics and stuff. And then through high school, and then when I went to college, I just kind of lost interest. You have other things kind of going on. And I did some editorial cartooning in college, but no comics per se, nothing really kind of serious. Until I met my wife, and we actually went on a date to the Galaxy Hut.
Yeah,
first date, and we were kind of chatting and stuff. And then I remember I went to go get a beer. I came back, and she was kind of just thumbing through a copy of Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I started kind of she let me look through it, and I realized how much I miss comics. Mm-hmm. I was like, wow, this is really a cool medium that I've really forgotten about and I've connected with. On a nostalgic, level, but also on a creative level. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of got me started again. So I started doing, the little mini comics, and then it got a little bit more sophisticated. And, now I'm doing, longer books and working collaboratively with other folks. So it kind of grew from there.
Right.
So it's interesting how it kind of was very cyclic in terms of how it came back into my life.
When you were talking about comics and how your mom had bought you comics to sort of, help you understand the English language, introduce you to the concept. As a learning tool, I know that you yourself have been hired to help communicate ideas through comic books. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So a lot of the comics I do are environmental focus or have a historical focus to them. So I think that tends to be very kind of appealing for educators and librarians, and so that's afforded me the opportunity to kind of go into classrooms and talk to kids. And how the comics are used is very interesting, because some teachers use it as a tool to help English as a second language kids learn to understand, appreciate, or understand and read English better. And some people it's a little bit more sophisticated, and they might be history teachers, and they want to use that to integrate into their curriculum, just using different mediums to keep students' interest, and that's been great recently. In the past, I think 10 years, a lot more libraries and schools are using it as tools. And I think initially there was this kind of they were a little bit hesitant, a little standoffish about it. But I think the way it goes now is with all the tools we have at our disposal, what are we trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve that we're conveying this knowledge. You understand the concept, you understand the premise. So whether you present it to a student in a textbook or in a video or in a song or in a comic book, what does it matter? Right? The end result is what you want, and for some students, that visual connection is what they need. We all learn different ways. Some people are very, text driven. They want to know the details. Some people are very visual. Some people are very musical. So whatever it takes to get to that end goal. And whereas I think maybe previously we had this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to education, I think now you have some innovative teachers that are trying different things and trying to figure out what kind of learner are you and what tools can I find to help you learn the best. It's
interesting as well, because I remember, and it's sad and not sad at the same time, I guess. Some of my it's from a TV show or something. Someone's like, most of my high culture references come from watching old Bugs Bunny cartoons. Right? I know about Wagner because of Bugs Bunny, right? But, I remember reading the old comic book versions of classic literature, and while it doesn't communicate the same exact idea, there's still a value to having that knowledge, and it's a good starter. It's, the reason I read Dracula the book was because I read Dracula the comic book first. And you get a vastly different experience from it, and they're not exactly, they're not on the same level at all when you think about what you're actually trying to communicate. Mm-hmm. But the comic book actually does something that the literature can't, and the literature does something that the comic book can't. Right. Really depends on what you're trying to actually get out of it, right?
And you can say the same thing about film. After you read a book and you see a film, you're like, well, that's not the way I envisioned that character. Or music, or whatever it is. It just kind of continues to add depth to your stories.
Right. Depth to your stories. It's always good to do, especially if you have a good story. I think, as far as I'm concerned, the stories that Matt tells through his graphic novels are of great importance. He tells the story of conservation and environmentalism, as well as trying to tell the tales of the Native Americans in the collection that he has, Trickster, with the idea that if those stories weren't told in that way or told at all, they might be gone forever, and that's of huge importance. And one of the basic foundations of this show is that it's about stories. It's about people coming on and telling their tales, and us learning from them, and us seeing that people are like us and that we should support them. It's definitely what we believe, and thank you, Matt, for coming on and helping us make our point and being a part of the Pilot Ways podcast. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's been a tough couple of weeks on the Pilot Ways podcast. We're losing a little bit of our momentum. When I say we, I mean me. And part of it's because I lost my job. Part of it's because I'm wondering, if the show is really helping anyone at all. But it's another battle for another day. Let's get back to this interview. When I very first started this show, I had the opinion that art and music was not as important to DC as it was to other parts of the United States. And I think I still believe that to some extent, but I believe that the scene wasn't as deep. But then as I started to do the show, I realized that it's not just deep, it's old and it's multifaceted. There's not just a deep punk scene here. It's not just a deep funk scene here. There's not just a deep post-punk or whatever you want to call it. There's like a million genres that you could go into 20 or 30 years deep. In your journey, when you started versus where you were now, did you come across any of that? Like artists that had been here for many, many years, or like how did you find it to be?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You always think that, you don't always think, but when we started the comics newspaper, the Magic Bullet, even in our own group, we're like, oh, this is kind of a neat thing that we wanted to kind of do. And, as we did some of the issues, we found out that there were other news. We did our 5th issue, I think, which was our End of the World issue. And one of our cartoonists who's lived here all his life said, oh, there's this guy that used to do comics newspaper back in the early 80s. So we did a little research, and it was John K. Snyder, and he still, and then he went on to do work for DC Comics, but he still lives in the area. So we kind of reached out to him, and he actually did like a page for us.
Right on.
So it's just like it was kind of neat that we're still kind of connecting. We're kind of full circle, and then I just felt that we kind of really appreciated the folks that did this before we did it, kind of, that were there initially, and I think that he was very flattered to be asked and to kind of regenerate that and be
right.
part of it as well. And so, that was kind of a great feeling. And I think particularly in this time, you have a wider mix of the types of cartoonists,
right.
not just necessarily comic book folks or comic strip folks. There's a lot of editorial cartoonists as well, right. Just being a big political town. And so, kind of mixing in with them is really great too. And I think we're in DC have that unique opportunity to see that. I think we're one of the few cities maybe in the country that can do that, maybe New York as well, where you'll have like an event for editorial cartoonists, an event for comic strip people, an event for comic book people. Right. But then it's small enough that you can all kind of appreciate what you do,
right.
In the different kind of levels, and that's been really eye-opening.
What about? And again, I'm not trying to put words into your mouth. Is there a responsibility that you feel at this point for the DC and the DMV artistic comic book community, with what you put out and the work you do?
Our responsibility in what sense?
In the sense of like you actually put something that helps people get their material out there, mm-hmm. and you even said that some people have even taken that and become professional or semi-professional.
Yeah.
Is there a responsibility that is there a responsibility within the Magic Bullet? I got to get this thing out because there's voices that need to be heard.
It's there's a group of us that run it,
mm-hmm.
And we don't have like a head person, someone, but we're working on it together collectively as a group. But we do have like 4 or 5 people that kind of run it because they take the most responsibility. They've been doing it the longest. I don't feel like a responsibility to a community. For me, it's more of a drive. Mm-hmm. I want to get this out. I want to have this as a showcase, an opportunity for people to do it, including myself as well. And it's this finished product. When it's done, you can kind of say, this is what I've been working on. In terms of opportunities, it's hopefully our goal is to, make it available to everybody. One of the messages we try to convey is like anyone can submit. We have an open submission policy. Whether it gets in, it's a different story because if we have, let's say, a 30-page newspaper and we get 40 submissions, obviously we can't fit them all in. But in terms of everyone has an equal chance, whether you're just starting out or you've been doing this for 50 years. Everyone has the same opportunity to kind of go in there, and we take each comic and evaluate it individually and see, how it kind of shapes up and what we want there in terms of quality and content. And so, so it's a platform, but in terms of me being responsible, I don't feel that, you know what I mean? So,
well, even
that's a little weird to say, but
well, no, and I mean that's why I wasn't trying to put words in your mouth about it. But at the same time, I think maybe I was taking it a little too far too, and saying a responsibility to get people's voices out there so that they could maybe semi-pro or pro. But at the very least, if you have a comic, and I mean I can say this from my perspective, just being able to get something into a distribution medium, I mean that from my perspective, it's not a win for everyone, but that's a win for me. That is an opportunity in and of itself. Even if it just ends there, your product and that's not a very nice word, your art is now in front of people. That is, for some people, the only purpose of their art is just for someone else to look at it.
Sure,
that's pretty rad.
And it's a great feeling when maybe someone hasn't been published, gets an email. We have people, like new people submit, and they can ask us, did it get in? And we tell them we haven't decided yet because we're still. And then when we do tell them it's gotten in, to hear how excited they are, that and we don't have a huge distribution. We print about 5,000 to 7,000 copies of each issue, but we go through it pretty quickly. When you walk, and I said this earlier, but when you walk into a surf shop or a record shop or a sandwich shop, and they immediately see you at the newspaper and get all perked up, it's a great feeling. Mm-hmm. You feel like you've accomplished something, like you've developed a sense of community, and it's really great, and you talk about just kind of cross-promoting mediums. We start talking about records and then comics and stuff like that. And I was talking with some skateboarders about designs. They're doing designs for their skateboards, and we started talking about comics and stuff like that. So that's a great thing. Another great thing since we started this group is we kind of interact with other artists. I think that maybe we tend to put ourselves in compartments. At least comic book folks do. Where we've had this great opportunity to talk to work with fine artists, and to work with sculptors and stuff like that, and get ideas and inspiration from each other that way, and to kind of learn the challenges of our specialties. I have a friend who's a very good painter, but he never did a comic book until I kind of challenged him. And he said, well, let's do a comic together. And he said, okay. And I think initially maybe he thought it might be just kind of easy because it's a comic book. But I think when he was done with it, it was very interesting what he said. He's like, it wasn't like I was working. Most artists will work on a big panel, a canvas, and that's their image. Whereas with a comic book, you just drew about 100 little images, 100 little panels, 100 little pieces of art.
Right.
And so I think for him it was mind opening that way. And it's kind of great to be part of that and to kind of get inspiration from different types of art. You
did mention that in terms of selecting comics for the Magic Bullet, everyone has an equal chance. Mm-hmm. So what is why does one make it and one not? So you get 40 submissions for a 30 submission issue. Mm-hmm. Why does the 10 not make it?
Well, you kind of we look for kind of a balance in there, and some people just just don't follow the specs. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? We have certain specs that you got to follow, certain resolution and size and stuff. And so a certain percentage of people don't follow that.
Got it.
And so they kind of get booted. And for the ones that don't make it, we make an effort to say, hey, even though we got it in this issue, you didn't get it in this issue, if you want to consider for the next issue, you can put it back in the pool. Sometimes you just look at the quality of it. And the great thing about Magic Bullet is whoever serves as editor for that particular issue or issues, it's their call. So we don't necessarily. So it wouldn't be like, Alex, you're going to be the editor, but there's going to be 3 of us that kind of mingling and interfering with your decision-making process. You decided to take on this work. It's you're taking the time out of your life to be the editor, and you get to kind of select things that maybe move you personally. That maybe as an editor I wouldn't choose, but since you're doing the work, you get to pick. And as you mentioned, some of the artwork is very, very detailed, very intricate, and some of it is very simplistic, minimalistic in a way, And I think that each of the editors that we've had try to get that kind of balance in there, So you wouldn't see anything like a Marvel Comics superhero style. you'd see a variety of it. You'd see content, you're like, wow, this is kind of weird. I wouldn't think that this would be kind of fodder for comics, but it is. Mm-hmm. Or this illustration is so simple, but so perfect for the story that's in there. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it, in terms of, what makes it in there, it depends on the editor and, their own kind of artistic sense at that moment.
Is there, because it seems like in some of the issues there's been not a super theme, but sometimes there's a thematic concept that's sort of being captured. Is that specific per editor, or is that always maybe a thought? Is there any recurring thread through the Magic Bullet selection process?
Not through the selection process, I don't think. Well, the folks that have been there like the longest, and they pretty much are going to get in there. Right. The folks that are kind of like the make up the organization. Sometimes when we have a call out for submissions, I think we've had some themes. That gets a little harder because then all of a sudden you're really kind of limiting the scope of the submissions. Mm-hmm. So, we've had like an end of world theme, which is, I think when I was an editor, I had like the first theme, but it was very broad. You can define end of world as any way you want it, like literally the end of the world, or the end of the world in terms of your life, in terms of breaking up with someone you love. Oh, you know what I mean? So it's very, very open, And then we've had more kind of specific ones. We had a recent one where the theme was Western, which is really tough. Some people don't like the Western genre, or coming up with a story might be tough. But most of our issues are kind of like are open themed. They don't really have a specific topic you have to do. We have a couple cartoonists that have developed like a character. One of my friends, Rafer Roberts, has this character he developed called Nightmare the Rat. And each comic strip, each page, everyone gets one page in Magic Bullet. And we only have a couple rules. It has to be a self-contained story, and no swearing or nudity. And that's pretty much to help us, do the free distribution.
Right.
But he kind of he developed this Nightmare the Rat character, and he's had like a standalone story in each of the issues. And Andrew Cohen, who's the current editor of Magic Bullet, he developed this character called Dr. W that's very kind of, breaks through that, was the fourth wall.
Fourth wall, sure.
Yeah, and, he's just this great, fantastic, play on the page. And so he's been using this kind of Dr. W character for testing things that he can do, on the page itself. So, in terms of themes, some people kind of do their own kind of themes.
Right. Breaking the fourth wall. This is a shout out to my old radio buddy Kurt, who used to host the Strong Style radio show with me. We used to talk about when you broke the quote unquote fourth wall in radio, it was actually the first wall. I don't know why we came to that conclusion, but we did, and it made us laugh. There were a lot of things on that show that made us laugh, just us laugh, because no one else was listening. Speaking of no one listening, you know what I'm going to ask you to do. Reach out to us. So I know you're there. You can get us on the Facebook. Look up Pilot Waves Podcast on the Facebook. You can email me directly, culture@pilotwaves.com, or you can find us on Twitter @pilotwaves. We would love to hear from you. Suggestions, comments, complaints, concerns, ideas for guests. All these things are things that you should be reaching out and talking to me about. Help me out here, people. I want to hear more from you. But right now, I know what you want to hear. More of this interview with Matt Dembicki. How would you define art and comics in your life at this point?
Yeah. Well, when I started doing comics more as kind of just artistic expression, kind of a release. I mean, when I'm drawing, I'm doing cartooning. I kind of tune everything out, and I'm just in a different world. When I'm drawing that page, I enter that page. And you get this otherworldly feel to it. And when I'm done, when I put it down, I just feel like you're kind of like, stepping out of your basement. Like, okay, I'm back in the real world. And initially it just kind of started off as just being kind of a hobby. And as I got more polished, and I did more kind of local comic shows, small comic shows, I think some of my comics got a little bit more attention from people. They kind of recognized the comics I do, and some of it was rather unique, like the environmental comics are a little bit different. so that kind of garnered some attention, and that's when it kind of started to develop. I got calls from publishers, and I would pitch to different publishers. And then it's kind of interesting that you say what you're saying, because then it becomes a little bit more like work. It's not so much you do your own rules and do what you want. All of a sudden, like, you do what you want, but in the end, you've got to do it this way and that way, and you've got deadlines, and it becomes a slightly different animal. And as you mentioned, I have a day job and a young family, and that has time constraints on it. And so sometimes, when you get to that level, you're like, well, am I taking on too much? Is it becoming a weight? Is it still fun? And if I had that kind of internal processing over the last year, where I could go on to a more, do more projects. But are they the kind of projects that I want to do personally? I have a very limited amount of time, and do I want to do that doing things that I get hired to do for other people, or things that I want to do myself? Whether it's maybe not the biggest commercial success, but in terms of a personal success, personal accomplishment, I get there, and it's that outlet for me. And so, I'm trying right now. I'm trying to find that kind of balance, and I'm definitely getting. I think more this year. I'm definitely decided to do more kind of like mini comics and self-published stuff to get that, maybe just get that itch out, and then maybe in a year or two I might go back to do some work for hire, more professional stuff. But right now, I'm kind of enjoying it, and Magic Bullet is one of those kind of experiences too, the comics newspaper, that I can kind of, it's a little bit of a sandbox, a bigger page, and I can kind of experiment in there in terms of artistic styles and content. And some of it works and some of it doesn't, but that is what I use for my sandbox.
Where have you? I know that you've had some interesting. Just give me one. Like, where's a place that you were using comics to communicate an idea that you never thought would ever happen?
Well, I had the privilege actually of going to Peru last fall through the State Department. So that's the last place you expect to maybe get a call from the State Department saying, "Hey, can you do some comics workshops in Peru?" And you're like, "Well, really?" And it was very interesting because I guess the premise was there was a big international environmental conference that was going to be held in December in Lima, Peru, and what they wanted to do was get a little bit of kind of people interested in it. So I went to they have like these English language centers down there and libraries, and I went and talked to students and teachers, and I did comics on great white sharks and stuff like that. And so it was connected to them on a certain level, like a different way, rather than just seeing like this kind of mandate from the UN, like we have to cut recycling by such and such a percent, or CO2 emissions by such and such a percent. This is a different way to do it, and really the way you connect with people and the way you motivate them is storytelling, So again, it's where as the type of creatures we are, it's like we make connections and we understand things through stories. And comics are just another way to do that, And I think that they probably understood, like, I can make a connection with kids about a great white shark. Everyone likes sharks, right?
They're badass.
And so I just made a connection with kids that way, and you can kind of explain environmental concepts about pollution and recycling through how it affects this animal in this story, rather than saying, this is, you shouldn't throw away plastics in the ocean and stuff. Well, why? Here's example why. I told it through a story.
Because Toothy the shark is going to drown,
or sea turtle is going to get choked or something like that.
Right. And when you think about it, telling stories through pictures in comics is actually older than telling stories through text.
Yeah, I mean, and even people that kind of poo-poo it today, I'm like, well, it's kind of a universal language still. I mean, when you go to a restaurant and they have like a chart of the Heimlich maneuver, right? It's a drawing. It doesn't give you step by step. When you're on an airplane and you look at the safety charts or the safety pamphlets, they show you illustrations, right? It's a little cartoon,
right?
So it's kind of a universal language to for us to be able to communicate concepts.
So, For you, I mean, and I'm not trying to put thoughts or words into your mouth. So you do a lot of environmental comics. Is that from a personal passion? Is that just because that's what you come across, or is that something that you feel passionate about?
I'm passionate about that. There, in my mind, there should be this kind of symmetry between us and nature. We are part of nature, and I really do believe that there has to be a balance. And once you get an out of balance, things can start to go wrong very quickly. Especially with pollution, that bothers me, and looking forward, and kind of scares me where we're going to go. But I also see opportunities. You can either be pessimistic or optimistic about things. And when you see some of the pollution that goes on now, hopefully some of these kids right now are just so smart. So incredibly gifted that they'll be able to take those challenges and figure out a solution. Take that and find a way to maybe purify certain things. But I think we always have to kind of find that balance and realize that we're not alone in this world. And there has to be a balance.
So the word association. You don't have to feel limited to one word in response, but just whatever it is that comes to mind.
So you want me to just respond with one word?
Yeah, and so you don't have to just use one word, but the words I'm going to use one word when I say them to you. And so the Pilot Ways podcast is about artistry, technology, community, and commerce. Mm-hmm. It's about the intersections of those worlds. We ask that artists come on the show and tell their personal stories because we believe it will further embed us with their success, and our success will be embedded within them. This we do believe. So, for you, Matt, what do you think of when I say the word artistry?
Craft. It's a deep sense of being able to express yourself through craft.
Technology.
Being able to reach different depths. Pushing the boundaries all the time. Not necessarily, it's not always a good thing, but that's what I think. You're just kind of on the fringe, pushing forward all the time.
Community.
A sharing. As I mentioned before, when you have a sense of community, I always feel like I have to share things with the people, and I want people to share things with me. Whether it's a conversation, that's a community right there. You find common bonds, and
commerce.
That's probably the hardest one. Commerce. Maybe opportunity. I think we maybe think of commerce as something that has to be always financially driven, and I don't think that necessarily is the case.
You have anything coming up in September?
Well, living in the DC area, I highly encourage anyone who appreciates all types of art, whether it's comic art, or publishing, any of that, to visit the Small Press Expo. It's in September, and it's usually held in Rockville. And it's an amazing opportunity to connect with small press, independent publishers. So there's almost no cosplay folks. It's none of you won't see X-Men, Avengers, and stuff.
You said almost no. Is there some?
You might have one or two people, but you won't see anyone dressed up like as Thor or something like that.
It's not on the awesome con level.
No, not necessarily. So it's a different audience, but people that love to do screen printing, people that love to do different types of press. If they haven't done this, I highly encourage them to go and check it out, because it is the most inspirational show that I go to. When I go to these things, I'm in awe of what people do, and it serves as a challenge for me to do the best that I can. You know, so when I come from there, it's just like I have my batteries recharged and I'm ready to go. So if folks can do it, I think the website is spxpo.com. Check it out.
That is a ringing endorsement. I mean, definitely you should probably check that out if you're any type of creative. Small Press Expo, people, go out to it. You heard it straight from Matt's mouth. It recharges his battery. It challenges him creatively. That's probably something we could all enjoy. I know I need that. You know, you heard me kind of bitching a little bit earlier at the beginning of the show. Lost my job. Is the podcast doing anything? Does anyone even care? And you know, you gotta fucking forget that shit sometimes. And I wanted to you know, as much as I complain on the show, and for that I'm sorry, I wanted to send a couple of shout outs to two people who without them this show would not actually be happening right now. One is Amanda Kleinman, who is she's a force. She's inspiring on both a creative level with her completely badass band, Heavy Breathing, and also on a personal level, in a friendship way, always pushing me to do this show, pushing me to make this show better, asking me why I named it the Pilot Waves, which, you know, if you want the short version, the Pilot Waves are the forces that guide the universe, and that is what we truly believe we are helping with. And I also wanted to send a special shout out to Chelsea Short, who continues to do interviews, you know, for us on our behalf, and for that we're eternally grateful, and we will never be able to repay you fully, because your career is skyrocketing far past anything that we could have ever helped you with. But, you know, with that being said, Chelsea, anything you ever need, you know, to just ask, and we would be glad to do it for you. The Pilot Waves podcast, of course, as I told you at the beginning of the show, it's all about having musicians and artists come on, tell their personal stories, because then their success is further embedded with us in the community, and our success is further embedded with them. This we do believe. We believe it full and wholeheartedly. And with that comes the requirement of going out there, seeing shows, seeing live events, going and enjoying art, interacting with the artists. But the most important thing to remember in all of this, across everything, be good and kind to each other. We'll catch you the next time. Thanks so much for listening.